So, Brian, I know we've done this before. We talked a few times, but still, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yeah, my name is Bryan Mann. I've been involved in strength and conditioning since 1998, and in lifting weights since probably 1991. So, shoot, probably longer than a lot of your listeners have been alive. So I've been around the block for a minute. Was at Southwest Missouri State for my undergraduate, where I started coaching under Rick Perry. Went to Arizona State with Joe Ken. University of Tulsa with Pat Ivy, back to Missouri State with Rick Perry, uh, up to Missouri for 15 years with Pat Ivy and Rourke Cutchlow, and then eventually made my way to University of Miami, where I was a professor and director of sports science for the Olympic side. Um, there with Aaron Feld, Eric Renahan, and that whole crew. And now I'm here at Texas A&M University, where I am heading up a bachelor's and master's in strength and conditioning / sports science, and helping out with athletics with whatever I can. And just, man, we're getting to do some really cool stuff here. College Station is a special place. And dude, I'm so excited to be here. Every day I come into work, there's something else new and cool that we're doing.
Nice, nice. I love it. Love it. So, uh, previously you talk about like velocity-based training, but
Yeah.
today I want to start with like your time with Pat and Brett. Do you also have Andrew Paul at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I coached Andrew. Andrew
Oh,
was one of my athletes.
what?
And I brought, yeah, and actually I had to fight Pat and Josh to get him onto the staff back at Missouri. They didn't think we had room for another intern. I'm like, dude, he's worth it. And, once again, time proved me right there on him. But yeah, no, I was there with them all.
Whoa. So you were the legend.
Oh, no, they're the legends. I'm just a figment of my own imagination.
Now Andrew's super smart.
Oh yeah, he's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And it was great being there at the same time with everybody. It was, there were going to be days that we were fighting each other, but it was one of those times that, as iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. We, Andrew and I specifically, would disagree and battle it out, and then we would come back and support each other, and we were both better for it. There were, we didn't always agree, and I think that's one area that people misconstrue with staffs, is that it doesn't matter if everybody agrees as long as everybody is rowing the boat in the same direction. Um, so that at least there's a consensus, if there's not 100% of everybody bought into the same thing. As long as you are all going in the same direction, you'll be successful. So we have to realize that being successful is a lot more important than being right, and that's something I learned there from working with Pat.
Cool, cool. So, from your time at like University of Miami, I know you coach football, right?
I was not, well, a little bit, but not tremendously. So I would help out with football here and there. Aaron Feld and I had gotten to be pretty good friends, and yeah, I miss coaching. I do. So he would let me, whenever I was around, go get my fill of coaching with him, and it was a lot of fun whenever I got to go do that. Get to yell at people, and feel like old times. It was an awesome opportunity, and I am so blessed that Aaron allowed somebody that he had no prior relationship to be able to step on the floor and do those sorts of things.
Nice, nice. So, this time I want to start with Plyo. I know you have a like Plyo seminar going on. So, for you personally, I know this is a big topic, but let's say for football player, how would you program their like Plyo from in season, off season?
Man, so in the off season, what I would do is I don't look at plyometrics the way that a lot of people do here. Um, as you having mastered multiple languages, you know that lost in translation can be a thing. And a lot of the early works, there were some mistranslations over simple things that caused bigger issues down the line. So how I program for jump training and shock method, I guess you would call it, or plyometrics and shock method, might vary from other people. So what I like to start out with is and this is me and what I like to do. I'm not saying this is what everybody at A&M does, everybody at Miami. This is what me from working with Natalia on some books and my own experience coaching athletes. So I just wanted to be clear there that, nobody's like, oh, I heard you do this. I like to start out with what's called extensive long coupling jumps. Okay, so going through large ranges of motion and make it look smooth and fluid. So it might be like a frog jump where we go down, touch the ground, jump up into the air, come all the way down, touch the ground, jump up into the air. Something that is like that, and it's really fluid. It should look smooth. It should look nice and perfect and coordinated. It should not look herky-jerky at all. Now, I think that this is important because we have to realize that different training stimuli have different adaptations. If we were talking about light, 20% load resistance training and 90% load resistance training, we knew the adaptations would be different. There's no question that anybody would have about that. But for some reason, whenever we talk about jump training, everybody thinks it's going to be the same. Well, with this extensive long coupling stuff, you actually can increase the range of motion around the joints, as opposed to making the tendons stiffer and greater resistance to deformation of force, which is important at certain points in time, but that's not where you want to be in the early off season, right? That's about restoring ranges of motion. So I like to go with those extensive long coupling jumps there for about, somewhere between 3 and 6, 8 weeks, depending on how much time I have. From that point in time, we'll start to move to extensive short coupling. So now the time in so our jump portion is still pretty smooth, but I don't want to be spending as much time on the ground. I'm not going for max height. I'm going for max coordination, max fluidity. So I'm not trying to jump as high as I can into the air. I'm trying to do the jump smoothly with very little time spent on the ground. So then I would do my frog, let's say I'm doing frog jumps or tuck jumps or whatever. So now I might be hitting only 2/3 of my max height, but I'm doing it with no time on the ground. Still smooth, still smooth, still smooth. So it's all about building the coordination, because what is one of the most important things for an athlete? Unfortunately, it's not squat 1 RM. If that were the case, man, I would have been an all-pro in the NFL if I were taller. But, it's not just strength. It's the ability to move. And I think that we can do a lot with jumping to be able to learn how to move better. And then we would go into its intensive short coupling. Now, the intensive short coupling, we'd be, I always think drop jumps. That's the best one that I could, play that somebody is going to get, where we're not getting we want no time on the ground and a decent jump. And then bounding and things like this, to where I am trying to get more effort out and have, and then my ground contact time. I'll start out having a little bit longer as long as they're getting the drive, and then we might push that shorter and shorter to grounds on fire as we start to move into intensive, in that intensive short coupling period. And then is the cherry on top, if we can get there. And that would be our true shock method type things. Okay, so our depth jumps, our anything where we're really looking at the special implementations, the ballistic push-ups where you'd be starting on a few, like 24-inch block, drop down, hit the ground, pop back up, and those sorts of activities. Get in the Smith machine and drop the bar and have to reverse it. Those activities would be near the end. That to me is the cherry on top. If we get there, fantastic. But they have a high, let's put that out here. Let me get just a quick drink. I feel like I'm about to start coughing.
Mm-hmm. No worries, no worries.
While they are great for performance, you have to be ready to do them, or else you're at a greater likelihood for injury. I've seen people who start the year out doing depth jumps, and man, I can't imagine what's going on with the tendons there. Fortunately, most of the time they're doing it, it's 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who they've still got enough tread on the tire to be able to handle something like that. But you try and do that with an older athlete, you're going to end up costing yourself a lot of time, because they're going to get hurt. They're going to have a tendon issue. and I've seen it myself whenever I tried to start doing higher intensity plyometrics without a lot of preparation. And me personally, everything just started hurting, and that happened about 10, 15 years ago. And that's whenever I realized I'm starting to get old. So, um, but that's how I look at it and how I prefer to program it. I feel at no point in time, should you ever stop jumping, you're just changing the way that you jump. I think that jumping and sprinting have got to occur throughout the annual plan. It's just that, how you're doing it changes. Now, I didn't used to think that way. I used to think that it should be all resistance training, then throw the plyometrics in later. But as we start to think about it, what's more important, coordination and range of motion or 1RM? And to me, I'm getting to the point where I'll take an athlete that moves well, moves fluid, and is explosive over somebody who's got a cool-ass, big-ass 1RM any day of the week. Now, again, that's my opinion. That and $3 will get you a cup of coffee these days. But that's just what it is.
Man, I love it. I love it. So, in terms of like drop jump, usually how high would you start?
With the drop jumps, man, I start at like 6 inches.
Oh,
And what I'll do is I'll progress them until their jump height at their contact time doesn't improve. I want it under 250 milliseconds. And really my emphasis on the drop jump is really the contact time, right? I don't want that getting high, because that is what we're trying to do with the drop jumps, is improve what's called your short latency response. Now, what that is, for those who are not aware, your short latency response is basically think about the reflex arc, how it goes from the muscle spindle up to the spine and then back down. That takes no time. If we can improve that, we're improving our basic stretch shortening cycle. I mean, all of it's stretch shortening cycle, but we're improving that first part, that first initial neural capability, that foot quickness, if you will. And so to do that, we need to be low intensity, and we will progress the drop heights up periodically. How often? If I were to say, like, if I were doing a team setting, I'd say every probably fourth or fifth session. If you're doing it multiple times a week, otherwise, I'd say probably every 3 to 4 weeks you could, increase it, especially if you're monitoring the times. If somebody is working on a one-on-one basis, whenever they go 2 sessions in a row without an improvement, jump the height up a little bit, and not much. I mean, we're talking 3 inches, so that would be what, 7.5 centimeters.
yeah.
I don't know where most of your listeners are at, so I'm trying to play both both sides of the world here. I say sides of the world. I'm all the other countries versus the U.S. and the U.S. So try and have the worldwide understand it as well. But you have to also make sure that you're not going too high, right? Because if that contact time goes up, you're not improving the short latency response. You're getting more to the middle and the late. And then those things are also more affected by muscular strength too. So we know that we've got multiple ways to bring that up. So, it just gets back to what are you trying to improve? You're trying to improve the short latency, which I think is hugely important. That's making an improved reflex arc. That's going to be fantastic, but we have to make sure that we are, training what needs to be trained and at the right time. If you go too high, you get up over 60 centimeters, the time that it takes for the muscle action to overcome that you're not in short latency response. Your muscle can't activate by that point in time. So then it's getting to a more long latency response. Now there's some middle ground too. And to me, it's just not super clear. And I will, I always tell everybody, whenever it comes to biomechanics, I'm 100% self-taught. So be prepared for me to be wrong on some things, but I'm right about a lot more than I'm wrong.
Love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
that's why you don't want to go too high, because then you start muddying the waters where you're trying to develop.
I got you. So when it's like, let's say, no matter it's football or basketball, when it's in season, football, you have like wide receiver have tons of like speed, they have change of direction.
Yeah.
Basketball, they have tons of jumping, so they have like tons of eccentric training. So during the season, would you implement like drop jump or depth jump into that?
No, man, to me, it seems like that might be, and some people are free to disagree, right? And I know that there are people that are like, no, there's no way, we got to do our highest intensity plyometrics in season. To me, I disagree because I think that sports skill, reigns supreme there. So, I mean, I might do some low intensity type jumping, but I'm not doing depth jumps. I'm not getting on that 75 centimeter box, that 30-inch box, and letting them hit the ground and jump up into the air as high as they possibly can. To me, I'm just afraid of all the other micro traumas that they've got going on, that this excessive force could be a macro trauma. So I don't. That could be me being risk averse, and I might benefit from doing it, but I'm I just I, my gut tells me this isn't a good idea.
I got
They if they'll get it in sport. They're doing a ton of jumping there. Now I know some people I would still jump train them, but I wouldn't be doing shock method type activities. There's just too much eccentric. The eccentric is where all the damage happens, the disruption occurs, and they're going to be getting enough muscle damage in the sport. So I don't want to disrupt that anymore.
like it. I like it. I totally agree with you. So, uh, I know on your Instagram you posted a post and it was like increasing strength doesn't like let's see, increasing strength doesn't always equal getting our athlete faster.
Yeah.
Why is that? Can you talk about
Well,
that?
yeah, absolutely. It comes down to specificity, right? Force at high velocity and force at low velocity are two different traits. One is more based upon the cross sectional area of the heavy chain myosin, the muscle fiber, and the other is more dependent on rate coding, how fast the nervous system can send the signal down. So you might have this great cross sectional area, this great ability to be this low end grinder. That's what I was as a power lifter. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to jump high and run fast, because that is a more neural capability. It's just that the signal of what's going to be good is coming from somewhere else. So, we've got our cerebellum and basal ganglia and all of that stuff, that in your motor cortex, it's got to send the signal down fast, take back in the feedback that's occurring from your environment, and then go do the next thing. So I just think that they're two different aspects. Now, is that to say that some people aren't going to see an that some people would see an improvement? Absolutely. Now, what I was referring to in that post, and it was a horrible cut, right? Phil told me I spoke way too long, so he couldn't cut it together that made more sense. But what I was trying to get at was that for these people, that their nervous system is blessed by the hand of God, right? That they are just extremely springy and explosive, like that French sprinter over that ran, what was it, like a 9.8 or something like that, and he had never lifted weights before. He ran sub 10, and he was the only French guy to run sub 10. And they have him lift heavy weights because getting stronger is going to make you faster. Well, he was never that fast again. And I think that was because this person was more reliant on the stretch shortening cycle activation. Some people would say that he is using his fascial system, which, guess what? That's stretch shortening cycle too, because that you were talking about greater utilization of the parallel elastic component. That's all that we're talking about with fascia. So I hate to demystify it for some people, but as long as your muscles are strong enough to set into position and not get pulled as that the fascia gets pulled and lengthened as you change positions, you're going to be seeing some great springs out of it. That's the parallel elastic component when we talk about the neurophysiological components of plyometrics. So whenever those people are relying on that fascia, when they're relying on that shortening cycle. And then you take them and you start lifting them heavy, and you start trying to make them go based on the contractile components. They seem to slow down because you're trying to take them away from what actually made them good. Now, some people will tell me that I'm out of my mind, that they need to be lifting heavier because of this, that, and the other. And, dude, maybe. And theoretically, that makes sense. That's what I would have thought beforehand, too. But, man, I've talked with Pat about this, looking back through that 15 years of data that we had. All the guys that came in super explosive, super fast, and they had like a 0 training age. When we got them super strong, they were slower. They were never as fast again. And I'd have to go back and look to see what was the changes in momentum. Because, if you decrease in speed, maybe you had a massive increase in body weight to account for it. I don't remember that occurring. So I'd have to go back and look at their momentum to see, what was the total change. Because for the people that aren't familiar with it, momentum is mass times velocity. So if you've got a sprint, you know what the distance is, you know what the time is. You just divide the distance by the time. That gives you your velocity. Multiply it by the body mass in kilograms, and boom, you got kilogram meter per second. That's momentum. And you know what else that is? And I hate to be the bearer of bad news for some people, that's impulse too. And, just you got to look at the units there. So there's a lot of people who think that can't be done in a sprint. And I'll be damned if you can't do it with some simple mathematics.
Like it. So, I know you talk a little bit about this, but why momentum, why impulse is so important?
Well, so that's a great question. Now, if we look back to the rugby world for a long time, and rugby is ahead of the states in terms of science. I'm not going to say that they're ahead of us in terms of strength training, but as far as the sports science, they're definitely they're ahead. They looked at it differently than we did. They had some national funding and the like. Well, if we look at the rugby world, they found that the difference between their top tier players and their second tier players wasn't speed. It was size. So it was the bigger players who were just as fast were the better players. And also momentum would be extremely important from an evaluative standpoint for you looking at your program, because, if you put on about 22 pounds, about 10 kilos, you maintain your speed, that looks like that's a big loss. It's like, man, I trained this whole year and I didn't get any faster. Well, you increase momentum exponentially because of that added mass. Now, that mass, some people call it a hit factor, and there's other things that go into it other than this hit factor, which means like, how hard you would hit somebody. Well, that's mass times velocity. Yeah, there's other things that you have to do with intent, location, the ability to tense up at the last second. Those things play into it as well. But, momentum is going to be important for selection because we could have, I just was talking about this with Dr. Reekman, one of my other colleagues here. We've had guys that were like, 5'5", running a 4.3 40, which sounds amazing. That sounds like Pro Bowl numbers, but they'd never see the field because they're too little. Right? So it's the interaction of mass and velocity that makes for the best football player, because it is a collision sport, right? Not just contact, but collision. So I think that that's going to be one aspect that's extremely important. And again, from the evaluative means, I can't tell you how many times earlier in my career I was disappointed that, this guy didn't get X amount faster. Look how much stronger he got. He had a lean muscle mass on. He should be so much faster. Well, dude, you're having to move that much extra mass too. So, we've got to make sure that, him not getting faster, the fact that he didn't get slower was a huge win. And if we looked at momentum, then that gives us the truer pulse to it. It gives us all of the information. And those who want more info on that, I put that, I think it was 2 years ago, last year, or the year before, momentum versus sprint times as an evaluative means or whatever. It's in Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. You just search my name, Bryan Mann, and momentum, and it'll probably pop up. And, I think it's crucial. I even did it for change of direction too, just because that would tell us what their true change of direction performance was. as opposed to just looking at time. Now, some biomechanists are out there and they are cringing, right? Hearing me say that. I know Dr. Jason Lake calls power a fluff metric because it's the product of two. It's no longer pure. However, it is very seldom that it is only the big guy or only the fast guy that are the ones playing. It is the combination of the two. In fact, if you look at a paper from Fry and Kramer back in the early 90s, I think it was 1991, they looked at a bunch of different football profiles, football teams, and they found that if they calculated power, just using, I think they probably used the Harmon equation based on when that publication came out, but if they just looked at power, they could differentiate between teams that were in the top 25 and out of the top 25, regardless of level. Now, they couldn't rank order within the top 25. It wasn't that number one was the most powerful, number two was the second most powerful. Skill obviously plays into it as well. But the fact that you could differentiate top 25 and not top 25 off of their vertical jump power, dude, that just goes again to show that, hey, sometimes these fluff metrics, they might be the most important ones. They aren't as pure. They're not as clean. But guess what, man? Sport is dirty. And that's just the way it goes. You got to be willing to get in the dirt to find out the answers for sport. It's not this nice, clean, pure answer that you could get from a traditional research setting and a traditional research study, because there's so much we can't control for, right? They've got to live their life and they got to play games. That's what they're there for.
I like it. So, previously, earlier, you kind of talk about like athletes that are strong or athlete they fast because they're more fascia based.
Yeah.
How, as a strength coach or as a young practitioner, how can we like divide these two?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the only way that there are people out there that I'm sure can give you the answer. And I'm not the guy that's going to be able to give you a definitive answer. The way that I look at it is I'm going to look at watts per kg, and if they have no end speed or momentum, and if they are super high on those and they have no training age, it's a good bet to me that they're that fascially dominant person. So I could look at two different individuals that came in. I remember we had this very, very athletic white receiver. That the race doesn't mean anything to it, but I was just throwing that in there so Pat could pick out who it was. Who had a great training age, right? He came in, he'd been training hard all through high school, a local kid, hardworking kid, made himself into a player, made himself faster. The stronger that he got, the better he tended to get in his other activities. Then we had another kid that was like a state 100-meter champion. And if it wasn't champion, he was up there pretty high in a large state too. Didn't really lift weights in high school. He comes in jumping out the gym and sprinting like nobody's business, looking like greased lightning. And then whenever we get him stronger, it goes downhill. It was the opposite of what we would have expected to have happen. And now it's just that the fact that I'm older and I can pick that stuff up now because we made those mistakes. But we, after the fact, we were able to go back through and dive into that data and find some of these things. So, and that's why I always want to talk about it whenever I get the chance, because societies grow great when the old men plant trees that they'll never know the shade of. So I want to make sure that I'm telling these sorts of things to people, not because I know that I'm right. This is because, hey, this is here what I found. If you're finding the same thing too, maybe you should change something. Maybe you should do it differently.
Nice. So, I want to jump to another topic. I know, like we discussed velocity-based training, and nowadays there's like force plate, there's like GPS data. So in order to like monitor athlete fatigue, like what should we like prioritize? Is it like force? Is it like GPS like peak velocity? Did you reach a peak velocity, or force plate like peak power? or
Well,
velocity based training? Which one should go first?
that's an excellent question. And each one of them has its pluses and minuses. If you're looking at the GPS, um, you know what's going to be a big factor in that? The plays that are called, the style of play that you ran that day or the team that you went against. You know, if whenever an athlete hits their peak velocity, it's usually on a long straightaway, run. Well, let's say that that typically happens on a punt or a kickoff. Well, really, punt. If you only have one punt for the whole game, probably not going to be achieving your peak velocity. In which case, that would indicate that that athlete is fatigued. When in reality, no, they're not fatigued. They just didn't get the opportunity to go out and show it. So I would prefer to look at it in some other means. Now, if I'm looking at the force plate, I know some people look at jump height, and I think that that's good, but I think that there's too many moving parts to the vertical jump with the way that we mostly do it. A lot of people will put hands on hips and they have a self-selected depth. Well, to be able to maintain jump height, we have to pay attention to strategy as well. Because after that first repetition, I hear that my jump height isn't where I wanted it. I'm going to alter my strategy to be able to achieve a higher repetition a higher height on the next repetition. So that kind of sucks. So I think if we're going to look at jump height, that would be fine. But I think that you have to standardize the starting position. Have some target that they go down to, and it is the same distance every week. Okay, hands on hips, go down, touch that target, jump up into the air. Then you can absolutely use height to monitor. But I just think that jump height, there's too many moving pieces with it. A lot of people like RSI mod as well, but that's the same thing, man. I've got my height and I've got my strategy. I've got to pay attention to both of those. So really the one thing that I have found that I look at the most and what seems to be the most impactful, and this again is just what I've found. It's a variable that has got like 4 or 5 different names. It depends on the country that you're in and the software that you use. It is the force. It's called force at the low point, force at minimum displacement, force at zero velocity, and there's a couple other words that I've heard for it. And I like to look at that in a relative sense. Okay, so watts per kg, or actually it's newtons, newtons per kg. I like looking at that point. Gather-Cole found that was a pretty good monitoring metric. And to be honest with you, that was the one that I looked at the most whenever we were at Miami. It was also a predictor for us and our athletes at the University of Miami that regardless of sport, it was an injury marker. And it was what I would call all-cause injury, like all-cause mortality that you hear about from physical activity, like 7,700 steps, or I think it's actually 2,000 calories of active expenditure per week causes death from any sort to decrease. Well, having below, within the Hawkin dynamics system, 210% of body mass, you were your host. You were going to be getting hurt. And as we increased those, it seemed to decrease those little niggling, to quote from the Australians, those little lingering, just always creeping up on you, nagging injuries that occur. So for me, looking at the force at zero velocity was crucial. You could look at sprints. You absolutely could. Looking at maybe the 10 time. My computer went black for a second. So looking at something like the 10 time, making sure though that you're doing it on the same surface each time. Turf versus a Mondo or Infinity flooring, that's going to be a lot faster on the hard surface than it would the soft. So you've got to be cautious. And just like that, if your force platforms are portable, make sure that you're putting it on the same type of surface in the same spot every time. If I did it out on the turf one day, there's going to be a lot more damping that occurs from the loose fill, the underfill of the turf. That's probably the wrong word. Somebody's probably going to comment on it and have the right one. But to be honest with you, I don't really care. The black crumbly up stuff, that fills up, that allows it to soften impacts. It's supposed to do that. So it's going to be dampening the forces. So they might not be the same as they would be on solid ground. So we've got to make sure that we're controlling for that too. So making sure that you can do it in the same manner every time. Questionnaire data, I'm a big fan of, but it has to be well done. So, and what I mean by well done is that the athletes are on board and the coaches care about it. Because if either one of those is out of whack, it's going to be bunk, which would lead back to most likely heart rate variability being our best one. And if we have the potential to look at the brain waves with it, so that we're looking at, everybody says HRV, HRV, you're looking at the central nervous system. I got news for you guys. HRV measures, you're measuring the vagal tone, right? The vagus nerve is a peripheral nerve. It is a cranial nerve. It's a part of the peripheral nervous system, not the central nervous system. So I only bring that up because if you're talking to a smart person like an MD or one of those researchers that looks at that stuff, you're going to look like an idiot. So let's go ahead and realize that that is the peripheral nervous system. How do we measure the central nervous system? Brain waves. And we can either look at brain waves, or I think that a questionnaire is a proxy for it, because where does your mood come from? Well, it comes from how you're thinking, how you're feeling, how your brain's acting. Your brain controls everything. So we'd be able to look at it from that manner. So, you know, in terms of monitoring, I'm not the biggest fan of a lot of things. And even with the force plates, with that force at zero velocity, one of the confounding factors there is intent. If the person doesn't give out maximal effort, we have shit data. And it just goes back to those old functions, right? Coming back from, what was that, calculus or something? You know, you put in crap, you get crap out. So, you know, there's no point in doing it if they're not going to be putting in good effort.
I love this. I'm so excited. So, uh, I want to like dive a little bit deeper into like the GPS data we discussed a little.
Uh-huh.
So, when it comes to like GPS data, uh, is there like certain metrics you're gonna, like, let's say football team, is there gonna certain metrics you're gonna look into? Are you gonna divide to like capacity side of the metrics or performance side? How would you view the GPS?
You know, I'm going to be honest with you. The GPS is my weakness. So, you know, I haven't done a tremendous amount with that. At Miami, football had GPS. I didn't. I wasn't messing with it. Um, and I don't mess with it over here either. Yeah, I know the basics of it. I know the monitoring, but whenever we're talking about like, um, what are the key, you know, key performance indicators, I'm not going to be able to have an intelligent conversation with that. I know that most of it relates back to player load, you know, so then, and that's really the only thing that I would probably look at is what's happening. Am I hitting my peak speeds throughout the week to make sure that I've got tissue tolerance? And what is the load, the overall load for my players? And I probably look at it at, you know, probably the top three zones. I probably wouldn't look at the bottom two so much, even though I always go back and forth on that if it's needed or not, because being on your feet is fatiguing. But you know, standing around and jacking around isn't. So if you're having fun with your buddies, you know, so I debate about, you know, what to add in. And you know, Ernie is probably one of the people that I would be calling about that. If I were to start working with GPS, I'd be calling him. I'd be calling Andrew Altoff. I'd be calling a few people to make sure that, you know, I've got everything together the way that it needs to be to do that. But you know, outside of that, Eric, I'm not going to be able to have an intelligent conversation. So I got to punt on that one.
No worries, no worries. So, last thing I want to ask is, velocity based training. How would you program it? How would you periodize it throughout the, let's say, same thing, football whole year program?
Yeah, so I'm actually not going to program it for most of the people. And I think that's one of the areas that people have really kind of gone haywire on, that it is something that everybody does. And I think this is why there's been a couple of studies out there that show it's like, hey, VBT doesn't work. You know, it's not that it doesn't work. It doesn't work with the people that you put it in on. So I want my guys double body weight squat before I'm doing it. Okay. A minimum 1.7. preferably double or even 2.2. And honestly, what I would look at, Eric, is their power still increasing? If their power is increasing and everything is looking good, then we'll keep training the strength. If it isn't, then we're going to change the emphasis. Now, I would still so let's dial in and let's say that this is we'll look at it in terms of my Cadillac and my everyday player that is over that 2.2 body weight. Beginning of the year, whenever we're going through our full squat depth and we're going through our ranges of motion and things like that, I'm probably not going to be including velocity on anything. Then whenever it's getting into time where we will have a heavy day and a more explosive day, on the explosive day, I'll just probably give them the zones, right? That 0.75 to 1.0, but I'll waive it like 0.75 a week, 0.85 a week, 0.95 a week. I still like doing that. And then on the heavy days, it's all out, right? Because these athletes have to learn how to grind too. They have to learn how to deal with fatigue. Now, then whenever I start getting closer into the season, right? So I'm hitting the summer, the June, July on my squats, then I would be looking at adding bands on and going to speed strength, going that 1.0 to 1.2. And you're going to have to use bands to be able to get that. In my Olympic lift variants, I would start out with my heavier stuff, heavy pulls, sitting at about 1.15 meters per second average velocity. People are going to get pissed there because I don't remember what the peak is. I think it's 1.44, but I can't remember that off the top of my head quite as well. I could go look it up, but that would take us a minute and that might disrupt the flow. But I would look at, my heavy pulls there, and I would be doing cleans. And then as we move into the season, into the summer, into the preseason, I'd be doing more jump shrugs, hitting those high velocities there, like 1.8, 2 meters per second or something like that. It was sick. I can't remember the speeds that that Dr. Sukamel put in his paper that corresponded to the jump shrug. And I didn't do it that much, so I just don't remember it. Then I would be moving from cleans to snatches because it would be having a higher velocity as well. Jump squats, hitting over 1.2 meters per second on those. I'd be going from strength speed to speed strength as we move into the season. Now, if I had my Cadillacs, my guys that are super highly trained, that are already strong, on my strength days, I would look at velocity loss. So I know I know where their 1RM is about. I know that they're good. As soon as, and I might be doing repeated sets at whatever speed, at whatever load, I'm only going to go until they drop off 10%. So instead of doing, 6 sets of 5, I'm doing 6 sets at 10% loss, right? So I'm mitigating fatigue that way for them, because for them, the weight room, we're probably maxed out what we're going to get there. So I want to, maintain the strength qualities that I can. If we can improve the power from the general means through the weight room, great. So we'll be sticking with probably just a little bit more intensive on the methods, starting out with bands at speed strength. We might end up going to even faster, to where it's 80% band and 20% bar weight on the squat. So it is just super fast. They're dropping down, snapping back up. That might have some impact on stretch shortening cycle. And then the snatches, catching it in split stances and things like that. And I would even do velocity, and I wouldn't be using zones, right? I'd be looking at peak power, and I would be moving faster than the loads at peak power, okay? On those unilateral movements, because the unilateral movements are going to have a greater motor recruitment as well. So, I might start those a little heavier and then go to more explosive throughout the year. And again, I'm looking at the individuals there. And how I'm going to do it is, I alluded to this, but I want to make sure that I say it correctly, that I'm going to create a load velocity profile whenever their movement is good. I'm going to find where they hit peak power, and I'm going to look at that velocity at which they hit peak power. Most of the time, these guys are already strong, so we don't need to get them stronger. We need to get them faster. So I'm going to take that peak power and have a zone created for that individual of about 1/4 meter per second. Peak power plus 0.25 meters per second. That's going to give me about 15 to 20-ish% 1RM to play with. And that's going to allow me to hit those peak velocities and peak powers for those individuals on those specialized exercises. Because that's what's going to matter for those Cadillacs. They're already strong. We just need to make sure that we got them as powerful as possible. Shifting from bilateral to unilateral. I don't have zones for those unilateral movements because, I mean, I didn't know. I didn't know, nor did I care, because I had a major cognitive bias back then. As a power lifter and a former champion power lifter, of course, I thought everything was about the squat, bench, and deadlift at that point in time. And I wasn't taking into account, rate coding, increased motor unit recruitment to several different means. And honestly, one of the aspects that I would go to with those Cadillacs is a lot of unstable load. Since I don't get these people who do all this unstable surface training. They're like, I'm training for chaos. I'm training for chaos. Be ready for anything. Last time I checked, a court does not move. If that court moves, everybody is hosed, because that's probably an earthquake and the arena is going to collapse down onto us. So you're training for whenever they have that 1 second before they die. BFD. All sport that I've seen is a chaotic environment on a stable surface. So I'll hang kettlebells, plates off of, with bands onto bars, and I'll do exercises with that as well. And that's what I'm going to be progressing to. So it's not even just the velocity; it's going back to that motor recruitment and making sure that our proprioceptors are working to the utmost with that, because our stabilizer musculature activation kicks up, and it does very, very well at about roughly 2/3 the load. So you're not putting all the damage on the chassis, and you're getting the same muscle activation from the prime movers and an increased activation from the stabilizers. Like, man, all bets are off. This is one of those areas that I'm looking to, after I get our academic programs up and running and I have time to do training studies, that's a training study that I want to go through. What is the long-term outcomes of unstable resistance training?
That's basically all the question I have for you today. So for those who are interested in what we are talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
On Instagram, I'm getting better at there. I got to figure out how to get my messages to come through, even though some of them I don't want to, because it's hey, you're hot. It's like, actually, I know you're a bot because I'm not. But Instagram is a great way. Bryan Mann, Instagram, and all my social medias, Bryan with a Y. jbryanmann@tamu.edu is my email. I'm not overflowed there like I was at Missouri and Miami, so I'm still somewhat reachable. I might not be the greatest, but I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And if I don't get back to you in 3 days, shoot me another email. So social media is the easiest. I'm busy, but I'm not that cool. I'm not that popular. I need to get on social media more and put more content out there. So a lot of the negativity got me down there for a while. So I just said F it and got off of there for a while. But I'm easing my way back in. Some of the students here are like, hey, let's help you. And so hopefully I'll be back up and active on there before too long.
Yeah, man. Yeah.